When I first stepped off the plane with Ethan, I had this overwhelming sense of possibility. The air smelled different, new, fresh, almost intoxicating. I had left everything behind for him: my family, my friends, my job, my entire world. But that didn't matter, because I wasn't just moving. I was stepping into a future we had built together. Or at least, that's what I thought. We got married quietly, without the grand fanfare, just the two of us at City Hall. A simple exchange of vows, a couple of rings, and a promise that we would make this work. The ceremony wasn't important. The life we were about to begin was. I didn't even question it when he suggested we do it sooner rather than later. He had been offered a job overseas, and if I wanted to go with him, marriage was the only way. It made sense, so I said yes. Without hesitation, without doubt, for the first few months, things were fine, better than fine. We explored the new city together, ate at tiny restaurants tucked away in alleys, and marveled at how different life felt. It was like we were on an extended honeymoon. Ethan was charming, funny, and spontaneous, just as he had always been. Then, one day, without warning, it all ended. It started as a conversation over dinner. His voice was casual, almost too casual, as he said, "I don't think I'm ready for this." I blinked at him, the words not fully registering. For what? For marriage? For being tied down? For ... all of this? He gestured vaguely around the small apartment we had furnished together. I thought I was, but I'm not. I laughed a little, expecting him to follow up with a grin to say he was joking. He didn't. "Ethan, we're already married." My voice was steady, though my heart was pounding. I know, and I regret it. That was when the air left my lungs. I stared at him, waiting for an explanation that would make sense. Something, anything, that would justify the casual cruelty of what he had just said. He sighed and leaned back in his chair, his fork clinking against his plate. "Look, I haven't had enough fun, you know? I need my freedom. I need to experience things before I settle down for real." My fingers dug into my lap. "You're saying this after we got married?" My voice shook, and I hated how weak it sounded. I didn't know how I'd feel then. It was that simple for him. It's just a change of heart, like picking the wrong item off a menu. Meanwhile, my entire life had revolved around him. I had moved to a new country for him. I had built a future around us. And now, just like that, he was telling me it was over. But it wasn't over. Not quite. "I'm not kicking you out immediately," he said, as if that was supposed to be generous. "You can stay while you figure things out. Find a job, save up, get your own place." I stared at him. "And what about us?" "There is no us anymore, babe." His voice was exasperated, like I was being unreasonable. "I don't want to be obligated to anyone. I don't want to live by anyone's rules. Marriage isn't rules, Ethan. It's commitment." He rolled his eyes. "See, this is what I mean. You're so close-minded, so traditional." If you weren't so against, he stopped himself. But I already knew what he was going to say. I swallowed. "You want to see other people?" His silence was my answer. A laugh escaped me, sharp, bitter, almost hysterical. "You knew this before we got married, didn't you?" He looked away, rubbing the back of his neck. "I thought I could handle it. I thought I wanted this. But monogamy just isn't natural for me, okay? So you strung me along until you couldn't pretend anymore. Don't make this dramatic, please." He sighed, as if I was the one being difficult. "Look, you'll find someone who wants the same things you do. You'll be fine. I'll be fine." Like I was just a temporary inconvenience. He changed after that conversation. His kindness became something cold and mechanical, like he was just tolerating me until I left. Every morning, he would drop hints about how much better things would be once I was gone. "You'll feel better when you have your own space," he'd say. Or worse, "I can't wait to really enjoy life again." Like I had been some kind of cage keeping him locked up. I tried to be logical about it. I sent out job applications, forced myself to plan my next move. But every time I sat alone in that apartment, I felt like something inside me was crumbling. I had sacrificed everything for him, and now I had nothing. No job, no security, no home. Just a man who wanted me gone. And eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed my bags, bought the cheapest ticket home, and left without a word. But coming back didn't feel like returning. It felt like defeat. I wasn't the same person who had left. I was a hollow version of myself, someone who had lost something too essential to ever be replaced. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, Couldn't step outside without feeling like the world had become too big, too unfamiliar. I couldn't face my friends, couldn't explain to my family what had happened without breaking apart. I was shattered, and the worst part? He didn't even care. Asterisk days blurred into nights. I barely registered the passage of time. My suitcase remained untouched in the corner of my childhood bedroom, a cruel reminder that I had returned with nothing but regret. I was back in the same town I had once been desperate to leave. The same streets, the same faces, but everything felt different. I had left believing I was stepping into my future. Now, I was back with nothing but the wreckage of a dream that had crumbled in my hands. I tried to keep myself together. At first, I told myself that this was temporary, that I just needed time to adjust. But days passed, then weeks, and I found myself sinking deeper into something I couldn't name. I stopped eating. Food tasted like dust in my mouth. My mother would leave plates of food outside my door, only to find them untouched hours later. I heard her whispering to my father at night, their voices low, worried. "She's not herself," she said. "She doesn't even leave the house." "What do we do?" my father murmured. "What can we do?" I wanted to tell them that I was fine, that I was just figuring things out. But the truth was, I didn't want to go outside. The idea of running into someone I knew, of having to answer their well-meaning but pitying questions, made my stomach turn. What happened? Back, where's Ethan? The thought of saying his name out loud felt like pressing on a bruise that hadn't even begun to heal. But the worst part, the part I couldn't say to anyone, was that I felt like I had failed. Like I had been discarded and now had to carry the shame of it. I had given everything for him, changed my entire life for us, and in the end, I'd been nothing more than a temporary stop on his way to real happiness. And then, just when I thought I couldn't feel worse, Ethan texted me. It was a simple message. "Hope you're doing okay." I stared at it for a long time, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Hope I'm doing okay. Hope, what did he expect me to say? That I was thriving. That I had simply brushed off the fact that he had shattered my life like it was nothing. I wanted to ignore it, to let the message sit there, unanswered. But against my better judgment, I typed back, "I don't know what you expect me to say." His response was instant. "I just wanted to check in. I still care about you." I squeezed my eyes shut, my throat tightening. "I still care about you." The audacity. He had tossed me aside like I was nothing, made me feel small and unwanted, and now he cared? I should have blocked him. I should have let his words rot in my inbox, unread. But I didn't. Instead, my fingers moved before I could stop them. If you cared, you wouldn't have done what you did. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Appeared again, then finally, it wasn't about you. I needed something different. I needed to be free. My chest ached with something sharp and ugly. Then why did you marry me? Why let me give up everything for you? Silence. Then, after a long pause, I thought I wanted it. I really did, but I wasn't ready. I let out a bitter laugh. Not ready. As if that excused everything. As if his lack of readiness somehow made my suffering invalid. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I turned off my phone and threw it onto the bed, but his words lingered in my mind long after the screen went dark. That night, for the first time since I had come back, I let myself cry. I buried my face in my pillow and let everything I had been holding in spill out the grief, the anger, the humiliation. It felt endless. It felt like I would never be whole again. And maybe, in some way, I wouldn't. The next morning, I woke up with a headache so sharp it felt like my skull was splitting open. My eyes were swollen, my throat raw from crying. I barely remembered falling asleep. All I knew was that it had been the first night since coming home. That I had felt something, grief, anger, whatever it was. It was better than the numbness that had consumed me before. But now, in the dull morning light, everything felt heavier again. My phone sat on the nightstand, still dark. I didn't check it. I didn't want to know if Ethan had texted me again. I dragged myself out of bed and into the bathroom. The mirror showed a version of me I barely recognized, hollow cheeks, sunken. Eyes skin pale from too many days spent indoors. I looked haunted. I turned on the faucet and splashed cold water on my face, gripping the sink as I forced myself to breathe. This isn't you. You weren't like this before. But before what? Before him. Before I let myself believe in something that was never real. I couldn't think about it anymore. I grabbed my phone, shoved it into my pocket, and walked out of my Room before I could change my mind. My mother was in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove. When she saw me, her eyes widened slightly, like she hadn't expected me to actually emerge from my cave. "Morning," she said carefully. I nodded, sliding into one of the chairs. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen, warm and familiar. 4. A second, I let myself sink into it, pretending that everything was normal. But of course, WASN single quotes. Mom turned down the heat on the stove and sat across from me. She folded her hands on the table, her eyes soft but searching. "I'm glad you're up." I knew what was coming. "You've been quiet," she continued. "I don't want to push, but we're worried about you." "I know." My voice came out hoarse. She hesitated, then reached across the table, covering my hand with hers. "You don't have to talk about it if you're not ready, but you can't stay locked away in that room forever." I stared at the lines on the wooden table, tracing them with my finger. "I don't know what to say." "That's okay," she said gently. "But maybe start by getting some fresh air. Take a walk. Go see someone." The thought made my stomach twist. I wasn't ready for questions, for the looks of pity, for the whispered conversations behind my back, but I also wasn't ready to keep drowning in this emptiness. I forced a small nod. "Maybe later." She didn't push. Instead, she just squeezed my hand before getting up to finish breakfast. A few hours later, I found myself standing in front of a coffee shop I used to go to all the time. It was the same, yet different new logo on the window, a fresh coat of paint, but the same warm smell of roasted beans wafting through the air. I hesitated before stepping inside. The place was half full, people chatting, typing on laptops, sipping their overpriced lattes. Normal. I wasn't normal. I ordered a black coffee and took a seat by the window, staring out at the familiar streets. A couple walked past, laughing, their hands intertwined. My chest tightened. I had once looked at Ethan like that, completely unaware that he had already decided I wasn't enough. I took a shaky sip of my coffee, trying to push the thought away. Then a voice interrupted my spiral. "Well, look who it is." I looked up, my stomach dropping. It was Adam, my ex-boyfriend. The one I had left behind when I moved away with Ethan, and judging by the look on his face, he already knew why I was back. Adam slid into the chair across from me without waiting for an invitation. He looked the same dark hair, sharp jawline, the same knowing smirk that used to drive me crazy. Except now, instead of butterflies, I felt something heavier settle in my chest. "So," he said, leaning back in his chair, "you're back." I wrapped my hands around my coffee cup, trying to steady myself. "Yay." He studied me for a long moment, his smirk fading slightly. "Didn't think I'd see you again?" Neither did I when I left. I had been so sure that my future was somewhere else, with someone else. I never thought I'd return like this, heartbroken, humiliated, barely holding myself together. "Didn't think I'd be back," I admitted. He nodded, his gaze flickering over me like he was trying to piece together what had happened. I could tell he wanted to ask, but he didn't, not yet. Instead, he gestured toward my coffee. "Still drinking it black, huh?" I let out a quiet laugh, surprised by the memory. "Still tastes awful, but yeah." For a second, it almost felt normal, like we were just two people catching up. But the weight of the past hung between us, unspoken. Then, Adam leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. "All right, I'll cut to it. I know about Ethan." I stiffened. "Of course you do. Small town. People talk." He tilted his head. "You gonna tell me what happened, or do I have to piece it together from the gossip?" I stared down at my coffee, debating whether I could even say it out loud. But the truth was, it didn't matter. Everyone probably already knew. I might as well own it. "He changed his mind," I said, my voice hollow. Decided he wasn't ready for marriage, that he wanted his freedom. Adam's jaw tightened. "So he just what? Threw you away?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. Pretty much. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then he let out a low laugh, bitter, disbelieving. "What a coward." I glanced up at him, surprised. "I mean, come on," he continued. "He marries you, uproots your life, drags you across the world, then suddenly decides he's not ready." He shook his head. "That's not figuring things out. That's selfishness." A part of me wanted to defend Ethan, to say that he hadn't meant to hurt me, that he had just been confused. But wasn't that what I had been doing this whole time? Making excuses for him? Pretending that what he did wasn't as cruel as it really was? Adam leaned back, exhaling sharply. "So what now?" That was the real question, wasn't it? What now? I had no plan, no direction. I had spent so long believing my future was with Ethan that I didn't know how to build one without him. I don't know, I admitted. I don't even know where to start. Adam studied me for a moment, then said, "You know, you were always braver than you gave yourself credit for." Let out a dry laugh. Yeah, real brave. Look how that turned out. I'm serious, he said, his voice steady. You took a risk. You followed your heart. That's more than most people ever do. He paused. You just picked the wrong guy. His words hit something deep inside me. I had thought I was doing the right thing by choosing Ethan, by choosing love. But love wasn't supposed to leave you broken like this. Adam glanced at his watch, then stood. Listen, I gotta go. But he hesitated. If you ever need to talk, or, get out of your house for once. Let me know. I looked up at him, unsure of what to say. Part of me wanted to keep drowning in my misery, to shut everyone out. But another part, one I hadn't felt in weeks, whispered that maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to go through this alone. I gave a small nod. Yeah, maybe. Adam smirked. Good. Try not to disappear again. And then he was gone, leaving me alone with my thoughts. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel completely alone. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Adam's words replaying in my mind. You were always braver than you gave yourself credit for. I didn't feel brave. I felt like a fool. Like someone who had handed over her entire life to a man who never truly wanted it. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something he was right. I had taken a risk. I had loved with everything I had. And maybe I had chosen the wrong person, but that didn't mean I had to let it define me forever. I sat up, reaching for my phone before I could talk myself out of it. My fingers hovered over Ethan's name. I hadn't responded to his last message, and he hadn't sent another dot. Good, instead. I scrolled down until I found Adam's number, the same one he'd had for years. I hesitated, then typed a message. You free tomorrow? His reply came almost instantly. For you, always. Coffee again, or are we upgrading to real food this time? A small smile tugged at my lips. Food sounds good. Cool. I'll pick you up at 6. For the first time in weeks, I felt something shift inside me, something small, but real. A step forward. The next evening, I stood by the window, watching as Adam's car pulled into the driveway. I grabbed my jacket and took a deep breath before heading outside. My parents had barely asked where I was going, but I could tell they were relieved to see me making an effort to leave the house. Adam rolled down the passenger window. Look at that, shoe actually followed through. I smirked, surprised, honestly. A little, he grinned. Get in. We drove in comfortable silence, the radio playing low in the background. It felt strange, being out like this, doing something as simple as getting dinner. For so long, I had been trapped in my own misery, convinced that my world had ended. Maybe it hadn't. Maybe it was just beginning again. We ended up at a small diner, just outside of town, the kind with red leather booths and an old jukebox in the corner. Adam slid into a seat across from me, flipping open the menu. So, he said, are we pretending things are normal, or are we actually talking? I sighed. Depends, how much do you actually want to hear? He set the menu down and looked at me, all of it. I swallowed. Why? Because I want to understand. His voice was steady. And because I don't think you've actually talked about it? Not really. He wasn't wrong. My parents didn't push, and I had shut everyone else out. Maybe that was why everything still felt so raw. I had kept it bottled up, letting it fester inside me. So, for the first time, I let it out. I told him about the excitement of moving, the quiet wedding, the way Ethan had made me feel like we were invincible. And then I told him about the shift the moment Ethan decided I wasn't what he wanted anymore. The way he had erased me from his life before I had even walked out the door by the time I finished. My food was cold, but I barely noticed. My hands were shaking, my throat tight. Adam sat back, exhaling slowly. Wow, yeah. I let out a humorless laugh. I think that about sums it up. He shook his head. You know, I thought I hated you when you left. My chest tightened. I know. I didn't understand why you threw everything away for him. He paused. But now? Now I just feel bad that you had to go through that. I looked down. At my hands? I don't need pity. It's not pity. His voice was firm. It's anger, because you didn't deserve that. A lump formed in my throat. Then why does it still feel like I did something wrong? Adam leaned forward, his eyes locked onto mine. Because you loved him. And love makes us blind to things we should have seen coming. He gave a small smile. Trust me, I know. For a moment, I just stared at him. He wasn't the same boy I had left behind, and I wasn't the same girl who had left. But maybe, just maybe, that wasn't a bad thing. Maybe I was finally ready to move forward. The days that followed felt different. Subtle at first, like the first breath of air after being underwater for too long. I still felt the weight of everything Ethan. The heartbreak, the betrayal, but for the first time, it wasn't all. I started leaving the house more sometimes. It was just for a walk around the neighborhood, feeling the crisp air against my skin. Other times, I'd go to that same coffee shop, letting the sound of quiet conversations and clinking mugs remind me that life was still happening. Even if mine had fallen apart for a while. And then, there was Adam. We never defined what was happening between us, and maybe that was for the best. We weren't who we used to be. I wasn't the girl who had left him behind, and he wasn't the boy who had watched me go. But there was something safe in his presence. Something grounding. One evening, we sat on the hood of his car, parked on an empty hill just outside of town. The sky was streaked with orange and pink, the last remnants of daylight fading into the horizon. Adam took a sip of his drink before speaking. You ever think about what's next? I exhaled, watching my breath disappear into the cold air. I don't even know where to start. Then don't start with something big. He glanced at me. Just do one thing. One step forward. I thought about that. Maybe I had been paralyzed by the idea that I needed a grand plan, a perfect solution, but maybe all I really needed was to take it one day at a time. I turned to him. What about you? What's next for you? He smirked. I wasn't the one who had my life implode, remember? I nudged him with my shoulder. I'm serious. He sighed, staring out at the fading sky. I don't know either. I figure as long as I keep moving, I'll get somewhere. Something. About that stuck with me. Keep moving. I didn't need to have all the answers. I just needed to take one step. That night, when I got home, I did something I hadn't been able to do before. I took out my suitcase, the same one I had left untouched since I returned, and I started unpacking. Not just my clothes, but everything. The pieces of my past. The remnants of a life that no longer existed. And when I was done, I picked up my phone. For a moment, I hovered over Ethan's name. My chest tightened, but then, I did what I should have done the moment I walked away. I blocked his number, not because I was angry, not because I wanted revenge, but because I was done carrying the weight of someone who had already let me go. I wasn't healed, not completely, but for the first time, I felt like I could be, and that was enough. For now. That's the end of today's story. Did things turn out the way you thought, or were there some surprises along the way? Share your thoughts in the comment side. Love to hear what you think. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to hit the like button. And if you haven't joined the community yet, now's the perfect time. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you're always the first to catch new stories. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next adventure.